Kitty and Mack, a love story. Eddie McCormick was all world, and everybody knew it. While most of the guys on the block played basketball, Mack, which was what everybody called him, played baseball. He played left field for the Ralph Bunche Academy, and when they played there would be more scouts in the stands than fans. He was big, 180 pounds, and 6'1". During the winter, he ran track, and the track coach thought he would make the Olympics if he stuck with sprinting. The coach kept him on the team even when he wasn't running, just in case he might show up at a meet. But baseball was Mack's joint, and that was where he figured to be headed. He was 18, and one newspaper article about him said that he could be in the major leagues by the time he was 19. That's how good he was. Naturally, the baseball coach loved him. That was the thing about Mack. The people who liked him usually liked him because he was a star. Mack had an attitude problem. He thought he could just show up and everybody was supposed to fall down and go crazy or something. He was pretty smart, too, but he made this big show of not caring about grades. He slid into his senior year with a C-minus average. If they gave him what he really deserved, Dottie Lynch said, he would be getting all P's. That's P as in pitiful. Well, Dottie had a big mouth, but that's what people thought about Mack. Some of the kids thought that Dottie was sweating Mack and was just mad because he didn't give her a play. On the other hand, everybody thought he was stuck on himself, but during the first week of his senior year, everything changed. That's when he met Kitty. Kitty was the granddaughter of Duke Wilson, who owned the barber shop on 145th across from Grace Tabernacle Church. Now, everybody who knew Mr. Wilson would expect his granddaughter to be smart, but Kitty was outrageous. Just the way that Mack dealt with baseball and had all the scouts looking at him, Kitty could deal with the books. What's more, everybody liked Kitty because she had one of those bubbling kind of personalities that as soon as you met her, you knew she was your flavor. Plus, the girl was fine. Not just kind of fine, not just take another look fine, but take the batteries out of the smoke alarms when she came by fine. Yeah, that's right. So she's smart, she's fine, she's only 16 and a senior. Okay, the first week of school, Mrs. Henry, our English teacher, said we had to write poems in the style of some famous poet, and you had to write the poem to a particular person. It could be someone you admire, said Mrs. Henry, someone you're in love with, or even someone to whom you just want to send a message. The boys all treated the assignment like it was a big goof, and most of the girls weren't too excited about it either. On the day the poems were read in class, it was mostly funny stuff or poems about how they loved their mothers. 3 people wrote poems about Martin Luther King, Jr. Half the class just listened to the poems and hoped they wouldn't be called on to read theirs out loud. But when it was time for Kitty to read her poem, she said, "I'm going to read my poem to Mack." Everybody paid attention. Mack leaned back in his seat and got this look on his face like he was too cool to breathe. Okay, Kitty went and stood right in front of Mack and started reciting her poem real slow. She was just glancing at the paper it was written on, but most of the time she was looking dead into Mack's eyes. How do I love thee, you sweet black thing? Why do I love thee? Is this some fling that my wildly beating heart has chanced upon, or has my light and joyous soul danced with yours in some other life, or taken wing, and flown with yours, you sweet black thing? The class was quiet, and Mrs. Henry put her book down and sat behind her desk. Kitty went on with her poem. How do I love thee, my sweet black prince? For surely I have loved thee ever since. My eyes first met your fierce but tender gaze, and your gentle touch did expand my days. As poets' songs fulfill the singing verse, and sweet love fulfills the universe. I haven't finished it yet, Kitty said. It's going to be a sonnet. She hadn't finished the sonnet, but she had finished Mack. From that minute on, he was stupid in love. What she did was to flat out change the brother. She had reached inside him and took out his attitude. Pee Wee put it best. What Mack was doing was dealing wrong, but dealing so strong you couldn't do nothing about it, he said. But how strong can you be when some girl can make you roll over and play dead any time she wants to? She can make that dude fetch like a cocker spaniel if she wanted. That was true, because Mac would be in the cafeteria or walking down the hallway, and all of a sudden this silly grin would come over his face, and either Kitty would be someplace near, or he would be thinking about her. Mac was so much in love that it made people feel good just to be around him. He was talking about going right to the major leagues and playing pro ball while Kitty went to school. They went out steady for a while, and after a few weeks, Kitty naturally wanted to know how Mac felt about her. She hinted around for a while, then she came right out and asked him. "You're okay," he said. "Don't give me no okay," Kitty said. "I want to know if you love me." "Something like that," Mac said. That's what he said to Kitty, but to everybody else, he was planning his whole life. It'll take her 6 or 7 years to get her law degree, he said. Then I'll play ball for another 8 or 9 years, and then we'll open a little business. Kitty lived with her parents above her grandfather's shop. That's where Mac was coming from the day before Christmas. Kitty had been up at Brown University in Rhode Island on a visit to see if she wanted to go to that school, and Mac had met her at the train station. It was a cold night, and a light snow was falling. Down on the corner, some guys were selling Christmas trees and had started a fire in a garbage can to keep warm. All of a sudden, 2 guys came running down the street. They were hoofing heavy and looking back over their shoulders. When they ran across Powell Avenue, they almost got hit by a gypsy cab. The cab swerved just in time, and one brother was slipping on the snow and almost fell in the path of a delivery truck. He was so close to being hit that he steadied himself on the fender of the truck. The car that came across the intersection was an old Mustang painted black. The 2 guys were running on the uptown side of the street, but the Mustang came over facing the wrong way in traffic, and a dude leaned over out the back window. "Drive by!" a kid screamed. People were hitting the ground or running or ducking behind cars. Most of them didn't know where the shooting was coming from. A window broke, sending glass across the sidewalk. People screamed, tires squealed. The 2 guys they were shooting at turned the corner and ran up the avenue. The car sped away toward the bridge that leads to the Bronx. In a minute, it was out of sight. "That's a shame," an old West Indian woman was saying. "Those gang people don't care 2 cents for your life," the woman with her said. "The day before Christmas, too?" the first woman went on, shaking her head. "They don't have a thing to do but to... Is that somebody laying on the ground over there?" It was Mac. A man called the police, and in minutes the street was full of police cars and emergency vehicles. "He's moving," a long-headed boy with a scarf around his face said. "He's okay." They took Mac downtown to Harlem Hospital. Pookie, who came along after the shooting and saw that it was Mac, went and told his folks. It was Christmas Day. When the news got back to the block, Mac was going to live, but 2 bullets had torn into his right ankle and just about taken his foot off. Doctors had worked on his foot for 7 hours, but finally they gave up. It had to be amputated. When he came out of the hospital, Mac was different. It wasn't like he just acted a little strange. He was a different person. At first, when some of the guys went around to see him, they said he didn't talk much, but then after a while he wouldn't even come out of his room. When Pee-wee found out that he hadn't seen Kitty. She didn't even go to the hospital, Eddie, who was in Mac's math class, asked. "She didn't even go to the hospital?" Eddie, who was in Mac's math class, asked. "She went to the hospital," Pee-wee said, "but since he's been home, he hasn't seen her. He told his mother not to let her in, and he wouldn't answer the phone." "You can't turn your back on people like that," Eddie answered. But the truth was that Mac could turn his back on people because he really had turned his back on himself. Kitty called him every day at the same time so he would know it was her, but he wouldn't answer. Mac's father worked in a restaurant just down from Sylvia's. It wasn't as high class a restaurant as Sylvia's, but it was nice. He went to work at 1 in the afternoon, and Mac would keep his door closed, not even come out of his room until after his father had left. The next thing that Kitty did was to organize a little get-together with Pee-wee and some of the guys on the baseball team. Pee-wee told me about it, and for the first time, he didn't make a lot of jokes about it. He was sitting on his bed, and he had his leg out from under the cover, Pee-wee said. You know, we just sat there and tried not to look at his leg. Mack kept laughing at his leg and pointing to it. Man, it was terrible. Dottie was there, and she held Kitty's hand. She was tore up, Dottie said. You loving somebody like she loves that fool, and you hate to see them looking so pitiful. Nobody else could get it up to say anything. Pee-wee continued. People started drifting out one by one. I know those guys aren't going back there. That scene was too rough. No one saw Mack for a long time after that. There were reports that he had lost lots of weight, and that maybe he was losing his mind. The worst time was when Mack's father called the cops because he would not come down from the roof. It was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning in late January. A cold rain slanted down onto the tar paper and onto the long figure sitting on the ledge overlooking the empty street. A policeman tried to talk him away from the edge, but Mack didn't respond. Why, son, why? His father pleaded with him. You're young and you still got your whole thing going on in front of you. I know it's not like it was, but you're still young. Who? Mack spoke without moving. At first his father just looked at him, not knowing what his son was getting at. What you mean, who? His father asked. Who are you talking to? I'm talking to you, son, his father said. I'm not your son, Mack said. Your son was a ball player, wasn't he? He didn't have no missing parts, did he? You're hurt, but... His father's voice trailed off. The pain sat between them even as the rain beat down harder, releasing the stench of dog urine from the cracks of the roof. The policeman told Mack's parents that they could either try to pull him down or leave and see if he could be talked down. Mack's father said he'd stay with him and try to talk him down. It was almost dawn when Mack, shaking with cold and the rage of frustration, finally got up and walked to the stairwell. Kitty was sitting on the stairs, a blanket around her shoulders. Mack stopped for a moment and Kitty took his hand. It was trembling as she put it against her face. Without speaking, he pulled it away and, leaning against the sagging banister, went down the stairs. He's not going to last, Kitty's grandfather said later. The boy has lost his will to live. The first week of February was as cold as it could be in the city without completely freezing over. There was a heavy snow on the weekend that blanketed the block in a crisp, white silence. Neon signs that seemed good-humored and inviting during warm weather turned cool and distant. Old men and women walked carefully along the slick sidewalks. Younger people leaned into the wind that swirled along the edges of the buildings. In the mornings, there were flurries of young mothers taking their bundled children to old mothers who would care for them during the day. Mentions of Mack had grown fewer and fewer until the morning Kitty showed up at 9 o'clock at Duke's barbershop. Why aren't you in school? Duke asked. I decided to stay home from now on and take care of Mack, Kitty said. That's kind of rough, isn't it? Duke said. You know how important school is. Not that rough, Kitty said. I can handle it. When things get right, I'll go back. Kitty. Duke took his granddaughter by the hand and led her to one of the barber chairs. He sat her down and took both her hands in his. Honey, life goes on even when some of us decide to stop and rest along the way. Mack's young, but he's a man, and he's made a decision about his life. If he doesn't want help, you can't give it to him. Then why am I going to school? Kitty asked. What can I study that's so important that I'm supposed to leave people who need me? Girl, you're smart enough to know everything your grandfather is going to say, Duke said. I'll call his dad and see if he'll let you come up and see him. From what I heard, he's not eating or anything. But if he won't see you, I think you should go on back to school. I'm not going to see him, Kitty asked. I'm just going to let him know I'm here to take care of him. You what? Duke sat down on the other chair. The door opened and Duke told the customer that he was closed. Of course, everybody on the block soon knew that Kitty was staying home from school. After all the talk about how smart she was, there was a lot of surprise, and some people were saying that maybe she wasn't as smart as people thought. You don't give up your education for some guy who won't even talk to you, Peaches said. And she didn't go up to the house or nothing. She just put a letter in the window of Duke's place saying that she was